organizational health is one of the most important things. If we don't get that right, to some degree, we're good at everything else. To focus on organizational health is the first thing. But I would say you've got to persevere. We need to focus on discipline. If we are not disciplined and we don't persevere in actually applying the model, you can't expect it to succeed.
This is the Organizational Health Advantage podcast with Keith Hadley and James Felton, principal consultants at Table Group. They're in the business of coaching leaders to build strategic focus and cultural alignment that leads to amazing results. Welcome to the Org Health Advantage.
Hello, and welcome back to the Org Health Advantage podcast. I'm your co-host, James Felton, and per usual, I'm joined by my good friend and colleague, Keith Hadley. Keith, it is great to see you today. How are you doing, bud?
It is great to see you, too. And since we were just together in Huntington Beach, I'll say I'm stoked to be here.
Yes, that was rad.
That was rad.
Yes.
Hey, what? Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and this is our first video podcast, and so it's clear, if you're watching a video, that we have two guests. Keith, why don't you introduce, well, I'll introduce Matt Lashbrook.
Absolutely.
Matt, it is good to have you. You are based in Australia, and we have worked with you in Table Group conference settings. And Keith and you have recently joined forces for an offsite, but it's great to have you on the podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to be on. Thanks so much for having me. It's it's wonderful to get a chance to talk about the great work we do, and it's I'm looking forward to what we can maybe learn from our guests today as well.
Yes,
yeah, absolutely.
Matt, briefly, where in Australia and how long have you been with Table Group?
So I'm based out of Brisbane in Australia, so in Queensland. So everything's rad and we're stoked all the time. We have, I think our coastline is like 4 times longer than California. So we have a lot of beach and a lot of ocean. There's a lot of surfing. That's
That's a little bit like a brag, not just like you were describing geography to us.
Yeah, a little bit of a brag, but that's okay.
So I have been there, Matt, and it's worth bragging about.
Yeah. Oh, yes. It is. It's a wonderful. Whenever everyone comes to Australia, they come to Sydney or Melbourne. Whenever I say I'm from Australia, they go Sydney or Melbourne. They're missing the best part. They miss Brisbane. But anyway, we've been in Brisbane, and I've been with the Table Group coming up on 6 years now.
Wow.
Which I don't know where that time went. Which is awesome.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. A lot of it went to a pandemic.
Yes, that is true. I did lose a few years to that. Yeah.
Matt and I did have a fun experience recently of working together in Europe, in Amsterdam. And I was looking around the room and I realized, oh, I'm the only American in this room. Like, wait a minute, I'm the one that has an accent. So it was really fun. But Matt, thank you so much for bringing Daniel. Why don't you introduce our guest today, Daniel?
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks so much. Yeah, our guest today is the wonderful Dan Cowan. Dan works with Merck in the lab water solutions business, and he is the leader for the APAC business for that part of Merck's work. And Dan, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking your time in your very busy schedule. I know later today you're on a plane to some other part of the world to go and chat with your team and your clients. So thanks for making the time to come and spend time with us.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Matt. No, it's good to be here. I'm also based in Brisbane, not so far away from Matt. And he says we're always surfing, but I've never got time for that. So we have plenty of coastline, and it's in the distance. It seems all the time.
But the reality is, I can't surf, Dan. So there we go. That's just
well, there we go. Yeah.
So Dan, I'm sure most people listening to this or watching this have heard of Merck. But they've heard of Brisbane, but give us a little bit of context. So the work that you do at Merck, how long have you been there? Tell us a bit about yourself and your career so far, and then just get us up to speed on what's, who the team that you lead, your responsibilities, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So maybe I'll clarify something a little bit quickly. So I work for Merck KGaA, which is a German company actually, and in the whole world it's called Merck, except in the US. So in the US, it's actually not referred to as Merck's because it's complicated. But during the First World War, the American subsidiary of the German company was confiscated, as you can understand. And that became what you guys now know as Merck in the US. And so we have to take a different brand name in the US. It's just how it works. So I work for the life science business of Merck, which in the US is called Millipore Sigma. Okay. And I've been with the company for 18 years this year. So quite some time. I started with a company called Millipore, which is actually a US-based company, and it was acquired by Merck in Germany. So, but yeah, it's great. I mean, I've been in the company. I started as a sales rep. I worked my way up to different management positions and working with different countries, and now I look after Asia Pacific for one of the business divisions within the life science business of Merck.
Wow.
So it's way too much travel. And as Matt said, I'm getting on a plane today. I'm off to Sri Lanka today. So it's pretty hectic. I've spent a lot of time in the air, but it's good. It's good.
Yeah. And Dan, tell us, like, how big is your team, and tell us the different countries represented on your team.
Yeah, so my team in total is about 300 people, and my direct reporting team is about 12 people. And in terms of which countries it's represented, it literally represents all of Asia Pacific, but we're grouped into big categories. So it's primarily I'm working with Japan, South Korea, China, Taiwan, all of Southeast Asia as a group. So that includes all of like Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, all of the countries in that area, including the small ones, and obviously Australia, New Zealand, and India as well. So it's a lot of travel. I mean, the distances are huge. It's about a third of the world, and everyone's separated by water, which means there's no way you can drive there or train there. It's always on a flight. It's challenging. Yeah.
And,
Wow.
And then I would imagine just the cultural diversity and maybe some of the stuff that's going on geopolitically amongst some of those countries. You mentioned China, Taiwan, just that clicks some potential tension.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, but I bet there is others as well. And so, yeah, talk about that as well.
Yeah. So that's actually one of the biggest challenges in the region. And it's a common misconception, I think, in a lot of companies, not just in the company I work for, but you divide the world into regions, and you've got the Americas maybe, or you've got US and then South America, or North America, South America, Western Europe, and things like that. Asia Pacific is often categorized as a region, but there's nothing regional about it. Every country is wildly different. The culture is incredibly different. The languages are different. They're distanced by ocean often. They don't even get on with each other half the time. I mean, it's pretty chaotic. And when you've got to have someone like, someone from Japan working with someone from China, from South Korea, that doesn't always work well. Someone from India working with someone from China is impossible. In fact, at the moment, I have a challenge where our main training center is in Shanghai, and I have trouble getting visas for the people in India to get to Shanghai for their training. So now we have to create a workaround. So it's pretty challenging. And what's interesting is, the people in my team are people, and the people work. They're happy to talk with each other and work with each other, and they're not countries; they're people. So
Wow.
In that sense, you can work with people, right? But you can't deny that those geopolitical tensions they do exist. And I've been at a dinner once where a Taiwanese colleague was arguing with a Chinese colleague about whether they had their own language or not. And they were having a full-on heated argument. I had to separate them at other ends of the table. I'm like, guys, it doesn't matter. It's not important right now. So, yeah, it's a challenge. It can be challenging.
And they're not going to solve that at that
No,
dinner.
they're not. Exactly right. They're never going to solve that problem. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because everybody on your team is a person. They're not countries, and your company is not a country. Your company is a company.
Yeah,
right?
exactly
With
right.
it, and
Exactly right.
it's trying to achieve goals and trying to drive certain outcomes and doing it through the different regions, of course. But yeah, that's got to be incredibly challenging. I was just thinking about how, so we work for Table Group Consulting, and we talk about the 4 disciplines, right? The challenges of a leader, anywhere with any team. Yeah, discipline 1, building a cohesive team, just getting people to have good conversations, make decisions, etc. Focus on shared results. Then we got to create clarity about strategy, culture, priorities, roles, etc. We got to over communicate and reinforce it with simple human systems like hiring and coaching and performance management. Now I'm trying to run that through the lens of your reality, and I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, like how does that actually work?
Yeah, absolutely. It's challenging. Building that cohesive team was already the challenge. In fact, the guy who heads up R&D, he told me it's what you're trying to achieve is impossible. And I was like,
Hmm.
is that a challenge? It's, okay, I'll
Oh
take
yeah,
that. So, and honestly, I think nothing's ever perfect, right? I think that everything is always a work in progress, but I think to some degree we've managed to achieve that, and it. I guess I'm a bit surprised we got it as good as we did, but it took some time. And I think Keith, it was either you or James mentioned before. It it's not simple to do this, right? I mean, it's easy to read and it's easy to take the idea, but to actually execute it, you have to keep pushing the principles to make it work. Um, yeah, so it is really challenging, but at the
yeah.
end of the day, they are still people you're working with, even if they are
Right,
from other
right,
regions. And one of
right.
the things that helps a lot is, at that level of leadership, because they're all country leaders or looking after a sub region, there is an expectation that they have a certain level of English so that they can
Hmm.
communicate outside of their country. And without that, I think it may well be impossible because the
Right,
communication gap would be too big.
right,
But
right.
the fact that they've got that level of English also means that we can have conversations around how this works and demonstrate it in workshops, and we can come together and do that. So
Yeah,
it can be done. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Dan, I'm curious, maybe just stepping back into your story when you first, and I don't know how you first got connected to table group methodologies or models, but what was going on in your business or in your responsibility that you thought, you know what, I'm gonna connect with Matt and see if he can help me, or I'm gonna read this book. Like, what was your entry point and what was happening?
Well, I'd heard of the 5 dysfunctions of a team. I think it's a very well known book, right? So
Yeah.
that's something that I definitely I knew about. Um, and actually, I mean, I ran into Matt because I was on the elders board of our church at the time, and Matt came along to do some work to try and get us to work together because there was some tensions in that team as well. And I was listening to some of these methodologies. I'm thinking, this is going to be far more applicable to what I do at work than what I'm doing here. It's going to be really good. So then I connected with Matt and I said, look, can we do this? Can we have a look at doing this in my team in APAC? And is this going to work for us?
I just have to
Yeah.
call a quick timeout. So, in other words, what I just heard is like with a bunch of us relatively homogeneous in Brisbane, all together in a very small location, we were going through these models like, this is really tough. But you know where I could use this? I could use this in my global region where nobody speaks the same language. They're separated by countries, often at war with each other. That's where
Yeah,
that's gonna be easier.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah, you're right. It's I guess the challenge is that you've got a bunch of people who think, oh yeah, this sounds good, or I think it's common in when you learn any model for not just organizational health, but in anything. It's really common that you'll go through it. You think, yeah, that's a great idea. You write a bunch of notes. You do some workshops,
Yeah.
and then after I don't know a week or even a couple of weeks or something, everybody's forgotten about it and they move back into what they used to do. And
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
don't get a lot of, coherence in that. Now, that particular team was meeting once a month. So it was really hard to actually get that to stick, I think is the point. But, my team, we meet meet all the time. It's really regular. So while we are separated by geographical distance, and we're all trying to do the same business, right? We're all working towards ultimately the same goal. We're meeting on a regular basis. So it's easier than it appears, actually, I guess is the chance. And it just means that we have to stick to those principles and make it happen. And, I definitely had some people who were obstinate and didn't want to be part of it. I mean, I think that's the case with anyone. But you have to confront those people and say, look, we're all moving on this in the same direction, and maybe you don't like it, but we have to do this, and then if we don't do this and you're not on the same page, then that's okay. But not here, it's not okay. I mean, you can go and do that somewhere else if you want it,
Yeah.
So that's the point. Yeah.
What did you actually do first, and what was sort of the initial reaction or the initial impact of that initial work?
The first thing that we did, I mean, we had a workshop, and then with Matt,
virtual
and then
one.
we had to do it. We had to do it virtually because of COVID. It was actually during those COVID times, and we couldn't go anywhere. It was super frustrating, and because of all the challenges of COVID, also to our business, we didn't have heaps of budget to travel around, and neither were we able to. I mean, we booked a couple of group of team meetings, one in Japan, one in China, and they were both shut down. We both of those meetings were stopped because we weren't allowed to travel. So we did it virtually, which you would think is going to fail. It's a perfect recipe for failure, right? But I think, and I don't think that solved our problems. It wasn't a magical workshop that then everything was fixed. But the first thing that we implemented as a result of that was changing the way we did our meetings. And I think that was really important in order to get all of the team to contribute, because depending on how much you know about Asia Pacific, especially in the countries up in the north. So when you're looking at Japan and even China and Korea as well, if you don't, they have a different perception of how their boss operates. So I think, in Western countries, we're quite familiar with the boss almost being like a peer. So you're happy to talk to that boss, and yes, they're your boss. Yes, maybe you have some respect, or maybe you don't. I don't know. But but it's more like a peer interaction where you can have an open and honest conversation and that kind of thing. But the stereotypical view, I guess, of the boss in those cultures is the boss is the big boss, and if the boss says something, we all do it. We don't disagree. They're all saying, yes, we just do it. Even if it's impossible, we'll agree to it. And while it's the stereotypical culture, it is actually the culture in some cases. You definitely still see it. Not everyone is like that, of course, but that's a big challenge. When you start in these meetings, you want people to speak up. You want their ideas. You want their inputs. But if I say something, they don't want to disagree, or they'll just be silent in the meeting, and which is potentially toxic, right? Because maybe in the background they're like, "Oh, that sucks. I don't know why we made that decision. That was terrible," but they don't add to the meeting. But it's not just their own personality; it's also cultural.
Right.
And
And were
normally
you?
they're expected to not say anything.
Yeah. And were you? I mean, you had been at the company for some time. Were you experiencing that as a leader? Were you were saying like, oh yeah, they're just nodding and going along with what I'm saying, but I'm not
100%.
sure
No,
they're pushing back. Like
definitely.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you
No,
wanted it to
definitely
be
exists.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So having
Is that the culture in Brisbane as well?
no.
Okay.
No,
No.
not at all. Not at all. In fact,
Yeah.
they
It's
passionate conflict occurs often.
putting a lid on conflict, not mining for it, is probably
Absolutely right.
more that we have to deal with. But Dan, you would have had to sort of then lean into that, provoking, prodding, mining for conflict. If if we are going to do it this way, it's going to look and feel different, and this is how it looks.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Matt or Dan, how did you address that? Did you address that dynamic head on, or did you just allow that to soak in slowly? How did you address it?
Well, so what I did is I took the model of the table group model of team, of team meetings. And in our weekly meetings, I made sure that there's a moment where everybody has to speak, and so at the moment, at the beginning, we want, okay, what's your top 3 things that you're doing this week? What are you working through? But then if there's a topic that comes up and people aren't saying something about it, then I ask and let the silence hang. I want them to speak up and to push into it. And they all expect it now. So they're starting to proactively say things, I don't want to be the guy who gets asked, so they say it. And it's good to the point where now other team members are prompting other team members. It's not just me driving it. It's the team members are asking each other and saying, well, hang on, you said that before. What do you mean by that? And it's, that interaction is now happening across countries. So that's one of the first things I did. The other thing that I did pretty early on is set the concept of the number one team. And that's a really big deal in the region, because these guys are looking after a country or a sub-region already, and they are passionately loyal to their own team members because they all speak the same language, they have the same culture, they understand what they're doing. And so trying to convince the guy in Japan is not just about Japan's success, it's about Asia Pacific success, and more than that, the worldwide success, but it's about Asia Pacific success. So it's not just, does Japan do well? It's does everybody do well? And if you make a decision in Japan that's good for Japan, but it's not good for Asia Pacific, then it's the wrong decision. So getting that concept across and getting buy-in from that was also really important to get that across the line.
Did you ever, it's one thing to explain that to people. It's another thing to actually live into a moment of truth where it's like, okay, somebody kind of violated the team one mindset, and I need to do something to it's another opportunity to over communicate and reinforce. But was this something that you,
let me give you an
intellectually
example.
They got it and they did it?
Let me give you an example. I'm not going to name names or name countries because I'll isolate the person, but there's an individual in my team who had quite a lot of employees, and due to some challenges in the economy in their local country, they had a number of workers that were not busy. Okay, so we have part of our business. We have a service organization that goes out and repairs equipment or deals with equipment, or installs equipment. Now, if we're not selling a lot of equipment because of an economic downturn, then these guys aren't super busy. They're twiddling their thumbs. They're going, oh, what are we doing? What's going on? And really, really good leadership would be to speak up and say, you know what, I have an issue here. I know I've got a problem. We've got, can you guys maybe borrow some of those resources? Can I use them in another area? Or, to me, that would be speaking up and working as part of the wider team. But instead, this individual chose to hide the problem, just pretend like nothing was going on. And I then had to step in and address that and say, look, this is not in the best interest of the region. You might think it's in the best interest of your country, but it's not even the best interest of that, to be honest. But it is certainly not in the interest of the region, because I have other countries that are screaming out for resources, and you're holding on to them instead of actually giving them up. And that's not team mentality. And so this individual, this guy realized, and now, it's he's much more on board. But that's something that I had to address as part of that. I also had another guy who didn't like the idea of, we're all part of it. He's like, yeah, we are one team, sure, but at the end of the day, I'm still going to deal with this. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works, because yes, I need you to deliver what you're doing in your country, but if you do something that goes against APAC, then I don't care if you deliver your target. I'm actually going to downrate you in your performance on the year, because my view is, if you're not working towards the bigger picture, then it's not helping us. I think it shocked him. He's like, no, but if I do my number, I'm like, if you do your number and it comes at the expense of everyone else, it's not the right thing. And it might look good today, but it's not going to look good tomorrow. And that's going to be the problem. So you need to be on board for the long term. And he was shocked by that, I think, but he's got the message now.
Dan, just picking up on that, how often are you having these, maybe not that conversation where we're talking about his end of year review, but how often are you having these types of conversations in the team setting?
So in the team setting, I'm trying to remind them pretty often in our weekly meetings, right? I mean, it's something where I want to bring it up and go, guys, this is our number one team. Here is our overall goal. Here is the problem we are facing right now. What can each country contribute to this to solve this problem? And so all the language about what we are dealing with in our meetings is about the region, not just about the country. And for instance, if one country says, okay, so for this month, our forecast is going to be short because of this unforeseen event or whatever, there's been other countries that step in and say, look, we have something in the bank at the moment, basically, that we're holding on for next month. But you know what? We'll bring it in now to cover your gap. But next month, I need you to do the same for me. So, and that's starting to be the conversation that we have across the region, and it works.
Matt,
that's great.
Matt, I'm just curious your take on what you were seeing, what you were observing. Was did Daniel get this right away, or did you have to convince him?
Yeah, I know. I think because of the work, as I said, the benefit that he has in his team versus where we first sort of worked together was, I guess he didn't have any church politics in his particular, like in his APAC team. So he didn't have
real politics.
And real politics.
Yeah.
Which is, I guess, people not have to play nice, like we're trying to do, but be nice like they would in the church setting. But I think once Dan got it, which he did early, I think that changed the game for his team as well. Like it wasn't like we weren't on a journey of convincing the leader and the team at the same time. And I don't know whether you've experienced that, but sometimes it's kind of like that. Like when that HR people or the OD people bring you in to say, I've got this problem with this team, can you help? At the same time, you're trying to get everybody on board with the org health journey. But I think Dan got it relatively early, and I think Dan got his role in that piece around the discipline. I guess a lot of what Dan's been talking about is, hey, yes, it's uncomplicated, but it's the discipline where it falls over. And that's the part I think that Dan's been very good at. We can all be better, obviously, at times, but I think he's done a really good job of, as the chief reminding officer, for his team and for his region. I think he's really worked really well in that side of things. With again,
Matt, you said something to me once. I don't want to steal your quote because I think it's your dad's quote about champions.
Yeah. So my dad's quote was a team of champions will be the champion team every day. No, wrong around. I said it the wrong way. My dad just rolled open his grave. Sorry, Dad.
I was like, wait a second. I hope that's not the quote.
That's right. The coach in James has just gone, wait up, what the? Yeah, no. Yeah. A champion team will be the team of champions every day. That is my dad's. That's what I used to hear all the time from him.
Yeah.
And it is that when we work well together.
Yeah. And how do you describe a champion team in that context?
I think I always think about, there's been lots of examples in sport where somebody who is like supremely gifted as an athlete in their field moves into coaching and is a terrible coach. Like it's one of those things that what they have in them isn't easily coachable. Like they have this spark, they have this magic potential. I think of a few people in football here in Australia. Whereas it's that discipline, it's the commitment to achieving stuff together. It's the ability and the understanding that I have to take a sacrifice in a certain position. I have to take the spotlight's not on me. I have to do the grunt work. I have to do the stuff that means that we progress everything forward. And it's not about me. And my success is intrinsically linked with the team success. And it's not about that individual. The trouble that teams have, in the corporate world, is their remuneration is quite often linked, to their individual team performance, right? When you try to get them to move into this number one team idea, we always sort of talk about the green triangle and the red triangle, the green triangle being your number one team and the red triangle being the triangle you lead, the team you lead. It's getting away from the trouble is I'm rewarded by what the red triangle does. Like my incentive, my bonus scheme, which is, what Dan's trying to say, hey, just because you win in Japan, it doesn't mean we win in APAC. And the reality is we can't win in APAC if we just win in Japan. Japan can be 200%. And we're still not going to win in that side of things. So I guess it's...
Shit, Japan is 200%. We probably do win, but...
So,
Matt,
go ahead, James.
Matt, I am hearing in these stories with Dan and learning from Dan that one of the things that maybe sets Dan apart is that chief reminding officer.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you would agree, and if so, talk a little bit more about that. And if not, what would you say? Like, oh, this is Dan's, this is what makes him a superhero of leadership.
Oh, I've got to pump these tires up. No, so
we don't know what that means. But
I think, look, what Dan was mentioning before about, hey, we've all been to these sessions, right? We go to a workshop and we're all razzed up. I used to work in sales for a decade or more, and they'd send you off to these conferences. You'd have them once or twice a year, and they get some speaker in. It's like, yes, I'm going to do that. I'm going to change my world. I've read a book and I'm good to go. And then you come home, and then, like you said, a week or 2 weeks later, it's like, oh yeah, no, I'm looking at a bed at 5 o'clock again. I can't do that. So it is the discipline around that, and I think that is the part that we always talk about it, right? We talk about, hey, these are not complicated theories. You don't need a Harvard business degree to create a great organization and a great team, but you do need discipline, right? That is it's common sense delivered with uncommon levels of discipline. That's how you build a great team and a great organization. And I think that's the part that Dan has been very good and, at not dropping the ball, of not being, oh, here's this great 2-day that we did over 4 days. But here's this great idea. Everyone was jazzed at the end of it. And then we went back to normal. No, he did the things. He changed their meeting cadence and meeting structure. He made sure that we never don't talk about, our team focus areas or our team norms, or, how we're going to have conflict well, or, what we're working on, those sorts of things. And along with, what are the things we're trying to achieve, for the business, but how we're going to operate as a team. I think he's done a really good job of that. And it's not that he didn't have pushback, and it's not that he didn't have times that he obviously had to go and have conversations with people who maybe weren't in as much as other members of the team were in. And it's funny, I've worked with one of Dan's peers and a few of his team members work in other teams as well. Like they report to country people when they're a functional lead. And I was working with one of the leaders here in Australia, and one of Dan's team was also used to be on her team before then she moved to a new role. And she said, I couldn't believe how good, like how she really was committed to this number one team idea. Like she was such a good example of the greater over, her bit. So it was, I think Dan's done a really good job of that.
Yeah.
And Dan very approachable as well. I guess that's the other thing around that. Like, do you have do people not come and say, do you scare people, Dan? I wouldn't have thought so. I thought you seem very, very approachable.
Well, they're scared, they don't tell me, so I don't know. But
yeah,
no, I don't.
Dan,
think so.
I'm curious, Dan, as you reflect back on the experience of going through this, what was harder than you thought it would be, and then what actually was easier than you thought it would be?
So I probably did two things that were hard. Actually, it was harder to get Australia on board, I think. Believe it or not, it was harder to get Australia on board than a lot of the other countries, and I think it's because Australians are culturally skeptical. I think is probably part of it. And I guess some of the things about making sure we understand what the behaviors are, and we go through them every single meeting. What are the behaviors we expect? What are we here to do? We go through all of those things every time, and they don't like repeating them, right? It's just they think, oh, this is pointless. Why are we doing this? Whereas everyone else is on board. So that was a bit more difficult. And I know, again, I think it's a little bit cultural. The other thing was difficult for me. If you haven't already realized, I can talk underwater. And so for me to step back in a meeting and give breathing room to everyone else, that's something I had to discipline myself on, and I still have to do. Um, but yeah, that's challenging for me. But now the team speaks up, it's good. I just have to back off and let them speak. So that's good. What was easier? South Korea was easier than I thought.
Wow.
I thought I would have a lot of trouble with South Korea, and they embraced it super quick. And that's, yeah, I mean, that surprised me, but they're heavily on board and really embracing the tools and the design. And
Do you think that was the
that's-
leaders themselves, that the individuals, or is there something in the South Korean culture and business?
I think it has
culture
more
that-
to do with the leader than the culture.
Yeah.
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 It's
Okay.
Yeah. The guy who heads that team up is super capable, but he's also adaptable to change. And so
Yeah.
when he saw the merit in the idea, he's like, I'm on board. Let's change this. Let's do it. And I think that's great. So
Yeah.
yeah, but it
What-
surprised me
what's
a
been
little
the
bit.
Yeah. What's been the impact of this? I mean, you start something out hoping it's going to go well, hope they don't get laughed out of the room, but you haven't just like read a new book and tried something else. I mean, what's been the impact?
Well, the impact, the most immediate impact, I would say, is for especially the team in the southern country. I started on working on Australia, Southeast Asia, and India before I worked on the north part of it. So I was only doing half of the region, and now I'm doing a full region. So I've had more time with the guys in the southern countries, and they're outperforming everyone else in the world right now. So
Wow.
when you see that the team works together as a genuine team, and that leads to genuine performance,
Wow.
it's hard to ignore it, and I mean, the R&D guy is eating his words. He's like, well, I thought you couldn't get this done, and now they're killing it. I mean, India just delivered the best year we've ever seen.
Wow.
And it's, again, it has a lot to do with the individual leading the team. He's a very disciplined individual, which is a little more uncommon in India than you would expect. But because he's so disciplined in driving not only the team in general, but also driving these ideas and the meeting cadences and everything else, the team has completely transformed. And that's,
Wow.
that's fantastic. It's that's not a small feat. Just in India alone,
Yeah.
that's challenging. So it's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's cool.
Between the lines, what I'm realizing is not just what you did to the team that you lead, it's then how you changed how they lead the teams they lead.
Yeah, if you don't
And
roll it down,
the scale
what's
of
the
it out.
point?
I mean, it's
Yeah.
that's remarkable. I think that's really the test of a leader is how do the people they lead, how do those people lead? So, hey, we're kind of closing up with our time here, but Dan, I wanted to give you a softball here. It's like, what advice would you give to other leaders? Now, these could be global leaders, they could be leaders in large organizations where they're somewhere in the middle, but or just any leader, maybe getting discouraged or just starting out. What advice would you give leaders as it relates to org health?
Well, okay. So firstly, I think organizational health is one of the most important things. If we don't get that right, we're good at everything else. To some degree, we're good at everything else. But I've seen organizational health as a mess everywhere. So I think to focus on organizational health is the first thing. But I would say you've got to persevere, and as we've said through half of this morning, we need to focus on discipline. If we are not disciplined and we don't persevere in actually applying the model, you can't expect it to succeed. I mean, it's a change. People don't like change generally. So if you want to turn change into a habit, what do they say? It takes like 21 days to create a habit or something. You have to drive it. You have to do it on a regular basis. You've got to remind them. You've got to bring it up again and again. And then when the behavior strays, you go, guys, this is what we're supposed to be doing over here. So I think if you persevere, it pays off, but you have to persevere.
That's awesome. Yeah, well
You're
said.
Challenge,
Well said.
Dan.
Say again, sorry, Matt.
I said you've got to be up for the challenge. You've got to be up for what you have to do as the leader.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you have to be up for the challenge, and you got to be prepared to put time and effort into it. It does take your time. It does give you extra work to do, but if you do it really well, it'll actually start to take some of your workload away because your team start taking responsibilities, for more than just their doing. I've recently built a project across the region where I expect my leaders within a country to also have some responsibility in another country at the same time. So I'm building that cross project, if you like, in order to make sure that the work they're doing also reflects their expectation that APAC has to make it. So I'm trying to build it into what we are doing at the same time as just our meetings and everything. So yeah.
Well, Daniel and Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. This was incredible. Love the fact that Matt, you brought Daniel and thought Daniel would be a great guest because he absolutely crushed it. And we love to hear about the evolution that you've led your team on, and clearly that's the 12 people that directly report to you, but it's having an impact on the people they lead as well. And and thank you for sharing your journey.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan.
My pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Matt. And for all of you out there, thank you for joining us on the Org Health Advantage podcast, and we hope you join us next time. So long.
Thanks for listening to the Org Health Advantage. Your hosts, Keith and James, are helping leaders change the world of work and invite you to share this podcast with your friends and colleagues. For more resources on building stronger teams in organizational health, check out tablegroup.com.